Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are. Welcome back to Textile Talks. I am Emma Parker. I'm project manager at the Quilt Alliance, and we are so glad that you took the time to join us today. It is so lovely to see everyone joining. I know you're all over the country and the world. If you haven't been with us before, I want to welcome you to Textile Talks. It's a weekly series presented in partnership by the Quilt Alliance and our partner organizations who are shown here. All of our Textile Talks are recorded and they're available via YouTube. So if this is your first one, you've got a couple of years to catch up on. And I'll share that link to the YouTube playlist in the chat shortly. The Quilt Alliance is the smallest member of this group. We have just 3 staff members, but our mission is huge, and that is to document, preserve, and share the stories of all quilts and all quilt makers. So, just a small mission, easy to do. Today, we are turning over the mic to a new organization that I don't think we've heard from before on Textile Talks, which is Harlem Needle Arts, to talk about their Legacy Quilt project. I think you're going to find this program fascinating. Before we get started, a quick reminder that you can use the chat box for greetings or comments or technical help. I see quite a few people already saying hi, and you can select whether you want to send your chat to just panelists, which will just enable the hosts to see it, or to everyone. So if you want to say hi to everyone, check your setting first and see who you're sending your chat to. You can also turn on live captions by clicking on the live transcript or CC button on your Zoom controls. If you're on a cell phone, you may have to back out of the meeting and select the settings in your general Zoom settings. But if you're on a laptop or a desktop computer, there should be a little button that says live transcript or CC. The Quilt Alliance is so proud to welcome today sorry, my slide's gone crazy. One second. Our guest partner, Harlem Needle Arts. Harlem Needle Arts is an arts and cultural organization founded in 2005 that supports textile arts and needle arts in the African diaspora through exhibitions, education, workshops, and more. Today, we're going to be joined by Harlem Needle Arts founder and executive director, Michelle Bishop, to talk about one of their projects, the Legacy Quilt, which was created in partnership with the Museum of Food and Drink. It spotlights African-American pioneers in the culinary world. This was a massive project on a short timeline that you'll hear all about, and I think it'll be really, really exciting to hear about the challenges they faced and how they pulled off this incredible and historic work of art. We will have time for a short Q&A period at the end of the talk. So if you have any questions for Michelle or about Harlem Needle Arts, please enter them in the Q&A box. We'll be looking out in the chat, but it's much easier to find them if you enter them straight into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So I'd like to now welcome Michelle Bishop. If she will join us, we'll be all set. Fantastic.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you all for having me. I see people from all over the country. Thank you for taking time out to be with us. We're here at 2 o'clock here in New York. I am live from East Harlem in our urban thread space. And I'd also like to take this time to just acknowledge that we are on native land. The Anape people are the people of this particular area. And we just want to give them acknowledgement and acknowledge all native land all over the United States and North America. I am Michelle Bishop, Harlem Needle Arts founder and executive director. We preserve through textile, anywhere from quilting, knitting, crochet, fiber fusion, weaving, spinning, the gamut. We curate exhibitions. We are commissioned to do different projects, workshops, and make sure that working artists in the field continue to have a source of economic development. Our urban thread space is a new space in East Harlem, and we're thankful to the Shishama organization for providing a space that is both a gallery and a creative space, and we will continue to activate this space throughout the year. We were approached by the Museum of Food and Drink, and at the time, I had never even heard that we had a museum with that particular mission. It was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn at the time. This is in 2019. And I think around July, August, they communicated with me via email, and they had this project in mind, and they wanted the project to be represented through quilts. Now, the thing about quilt art, and I know some of you or many of you on this call may be familiar with 3-layer quilting, and familiar with the visual. As there is a quilt behind me, let me also acknowledge that this quilt was done by the team curators of the Schomburg Center of Research in Black Culture under the leadership of our teaching artist, Ife Felix. So this is a 3-layer quilt. It is not only just visually appealing, but it also has research involved. It has research of textile, research dealing with activism, and also being able to perform the technique. So as many people see a visual wonder, not everyone understands the layers of what happens with a quilt. So when we are approached, and sometimes it's, oh, we want this. We want something that looks like a crazy quilt, or we want something that looks like this. Well, what else is involved? So initially, I'm going to start to share my screen. Let me go up, sorry, do this correctly. Give me 1 second. Okay, still up. Slideshow. See, share first. Okay. So initially we were approached by the museum and they wanted to create a quilt. At the time, they really didn't know the size. We knew that it would be at the Africa Center, which is here in Harlem. So just for some geographic context, New York City is made up of 5 boroughs: Staten Island, the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. So Brooklyn, the Museum of Food and Drink. We are here in Harlem, which is a part of Manhattan. There, if you had to drive to Brooklyn, it could take you 30 to an hour in time, depending on what part of Brooklyn you're going to. They approached us about the project, which was called the Legacy Quilt, which chronicles the history of Africans, African Americans, and their contributions to the landscape of food through agriculture, inventions, commerce, distilling, and there are a few other categories. It also honored 400 years since the first enslaved Africans had been brought to Jamestown, Virginia, and that would have been in 2019 and in 1619, 400 years, 2019, and the exhibit was to open in the end of March, beginning of April 2020. And as you all know, COVID happened, so the exhibit was closed until this year, 2022, and opened in February. It was to close June 19th for Juneteenth weekend, but because of the success of the exhibition, it was actually extended a month to July 17th. It was at the Africa Center, and the Africa Center is a new space that's in Harlem, and they're building it, different departments of the space out. So this is the first time there was an exhibition in the building, and one that could accommodate a 14-foot by 30-foot quilt. And yes, that's what we did. So August 2019, we were approached by MOFAD. I got a call from Catherine, and I have to acknowledge them. Peter, who then was the then executive director, Catherine, Jean, Alexis, and the new executive director, Natalie. I'd like to give them thanks for entrusting us in this project. This project was the brainchild of Dr. Jessica B. Harris. Dr. Harris is a food historian. She wrote the book High on the Hog some years ago, and you may be familiar with High on the Hog if you've seen the series High on the Hog on Netflix. Dr. Harris is in the first 2 episodes, that travels to Benin with Stephen Satterfield is the documentarian that did the work. So she travels with him to Benin, and they look and research the staples of food from Africa and how they came to the Americas. In taking on a project such as this and having to sort of explain the layers, I selected the artists that would participate. One of the artists, who is a Harlem resident, is Laura R. Gadsden. And she is not only a quilt artist, primarily working in quilt, but she also does stained glass. She paints, she quilts, she tie-dyes, she does a number of things. And when they say a master of none, no, she's a master of all. So this is Laura Gadsden. And Sylvia Hernandez. Now, Sylvia Hernandez lives in Brooklyn. Laura lives in Harlem. And we worked with Sylvia, who is an artist, a teaching artist, self-taught, has been a part of many exhibitions over the last several months, as well as commissions. One of the key aspects of selecting these two artists is that they both had long arm machines. Ife Felix is also a quilt artist, and there is a part of the exhibition that, well, one, Ife worked on the Legacy Quilt, assisting Laura in some cases, but she also produced a quilt which will be shown at the next iteration of the exhibit when it travels. And so before you question about the traveling, I don't know yet where it will travel to, but it will be traveling. So she produced the white on white quilt, and it is, she's also a resident of Harlem. And then there's me. So now let me say first, do not try this at home. I do not suggest that a quilt project of this magnitude be done within about 8 months. So from about August 2019, we delivered the quilt, I believe it was the first week of March, and we completed 2 massive quilts. The white on white quilt is about 9 feet by 22 feet. The Legacy quilt, like I said, is 14 by 30. So this is me sitting at the computer working on the database. None of this would have been possible without me building a database to keep track of the information, to keep track of 406 quilt blocks. Of those 406, 400 individual blocks represent a particular icon. Each icon has a time period, the industry that they were in, maybe some online links, a little narrative about who they are, what their contributions were, so on and so forth. And in keeping track of all the information with a database, we have to first, one, work with an illustrator who's creating the actual imaging that you'll see in a minute, taking that and making sure it's sized correctly for the block that it has to go on to, understanding the time period so that the textile that was used to frame the block or to be the background of the block was historically accurate. So if we're working on someone who was in the 1800s, we're not going to use let's say, a modern day African textile such as this. It would not have been appropriate for that particular time period. So in doing all the background work, I went to the Met Museum here in New York, to their textile library. I also researched a number of people who had worked with dealing with textile and what enslaved Africans actually were allowed to wear. Now that varies from state to state. In some cases, much of the textile that was used in certain time periods included Ossenberg. It included possibly some cottons, what I call, in Barbados, we call it a crocus bag. So it's like a very rough burlap type bag that feed or potatoes or something would have been packed into. Of course, the color is a very muted color. There is no color. It was devoid of color. So what we did is we searched for duplicate fabrics, reproduction fabrics of certain time periods, so it would be historically accurate. Before I could move forward, I had to explain to the MOFAD team how the quilt block would look. The reason why there's a silhouette here is because initially the icon was going to be represented in a silhouette, and it would have been just a black image in the quilt block. However, that changed. So in working once again, in a project like this, there are a number of changes, and you have to keep up with all the data, the content, and the layers, no pun intended, of what the project is about. So showing the sashing in the L shape on the side, the left side, and the bottom, on the top and the right side, what it looks like if there's patchwork in the background. So this is my mock-up of what that looked like. And this was for the purposes then of, we were also assigned to be responsible for photographing each block when the block was completed. So we have to present what the sizing would be, what it looks like once it's joined together, so that we could meet the end measurement. At the time it was 14 by 29, but it later was 14 by 30, so that we could be accurate, so that the space could accommodate what we had to install. So here is one of the blocks that is a part of the quilt. This is the Black Panther Party People's Free Food Program. We were blessed that Adrian Franks, who is an illustrator, created the illustrations, and the illustrations vary depending on the original artwork or imaging that he used to create the illustration. Once he creates the illustration, then he sends it to us. We have to then send it over to a printer. One of the things about working with a true life illustration of someone is that as Black people, we come in all different shades and skin tones. And to that end, it was important for me and important for our involvement that the tone, the complexion, be as accurate as possible. And I have to give a shout out to Katrina Jeffries, who rescued me when we were trying to make sure we were working with a printer that could give us the right coloring, who provided us with what's called a chip chart, so that we had over about 150 something different skin tones to work with. So here you have Chef Marcus Samuelson. I have a little bias because Marcus is here in Harlem, one of his many restaurants. But if I don't know I can't remember what his skin tone color was, but you would look at a chart and you would say, okay, well, he looks like his skin tone is closest to B15. And so you would have to make sure that each illustration was labeled Marcus Samuelson, B15, and you would put all the B15 icons together in the database so that you can query them and give the output to the printer. Here is an illustration of the ice cream scoop. Alfred Kroll invented the ice cream scoop. There were different aspects of an ice cream scoop. I think this was the third invention of it. And this has the mechanism that actually allows you to press so that the ice cream comes out of the scoop. So you're working with not only people and from photographs, you're working with sometimes historical paintings of an individual, you're working with inventions such as this, and they all have to be part of the telling the story in quilt. So here is a sort of piece from my database. And this there's actually another part of this. I'll talk about the mapping later. So this is Anthony Johnson. This is the original illustration that Adrian did. And this was the completed quilt block for Adrian, of Mr. Johnson. This, once again, is historically accurate in terms of the types of fabrics that we use, the colors of the fabrics. The illustration was appliqued onto the quilt block. And there, we keep track of the history. One of the things about keeping track of the history and also reading through all of it is that the artist, in this case, it was Laura Gadsden that worked on this particular block. There may be something in the narrative that talks about something very specific to this person, whether it be location or the industry. So let's just say, I know I don't have the illustration up, but there was an oyster farmer. And this gentleman was here in New York, highly revered. So Laura found a pearl and a fabric that had an oyster on it, oyster shell. And so she sewed that onto the final quilt along with the pearl, so that there's a little more context in telling the story about that particular icon. Here's another one. This is enslaved rice farmers. And once again, it tells you all the different tidbits about this particular time period. Now, these quilt blocks that I'm showing you are actually just individual quilt blocks. These were part of an initial fundraiser for this particular project. This is Dookie Chase or Leah Chase. Sadly, we lost Miss Chase in 2019, but her restaurant in Louisiana still lives on. She's definitely a chef. She is part of a movement she was there to make sure that people were traveling through the South were able to have a place to stop and eat. She has probably seen more presidents come through her space than most restaurants. And this is what Miss Chase's block looked like when it was completed. Here's a picture of Miss Chase. So here is a picture of the illustration. So now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. This is a section of the quilt, of the finished quilt. So as you can see, there's sashing that goes along the side. There are different time periods, inventions. Here is an illustration, and this is a little bit of an embellishment. Let's see if we can zoom into that. I don't know if you can see, yes. Here's an embellishment, and I'm not sure, I don't remember what this particular icon represents, but there's something here that looks like a particular flower. Let's zoom back out. Here's another section of the quilt. So you have a plate of food. You have something here. This is Fannie Lou Hamer, and you probably say, what does she have to do with food? Well, she had to do with food in terms of making sure that Black people had nutrition. She was an advocate, and so she was included in the quilt. I think this is, I may be wrong, but this is Pigfoot Mary, who was one of the first women to have a food cart, I believe, in Harlem. Or maybe this is the food cart. I'm sorry, I don't remember all 400, but I do have some favorites. This is the apparatus that was used at the top row, the third in. That's the like a lemon squeezer, that apparatus. Now here is another group of pictures. This is Reginald Lewis, who was he was the owner of Beatrice Foods back in the 80s. He was an entrepreneur, highly revered. Sadly, we lost him early, but there is a Reginald Lewis Museum, which is in Maryland. This is Shirley Sherrod. Shirley Sherrod works still with farmers all over the country, and she worked as an advocate and still does for farmers in the country. This is Chef JJ. Chef JJ was the chef for the Minton's restaurant, which was here in Harlem. He now has a new restaurant and he also has a show. His restaurant is called Field Trip, Field Trip, where he creates different types of bowls, rice bowls. This is Chef Pierre. Now, Pierre is from Senegal, and he has a restaurant here, which he's one of the co-owners, that is part of the Africa Center, which is called Teranga. And if anyone has ever traveled to Senegal, there is a hotel in Senegal called Teranga. This is Chef Twitty, who, I can't remember his first name. Sorry about that. His book is, he chronicled the connection with African foods, Caribbean food, the Americas, and the different connections within that food landscape. And this here, I want to zoom in. This is Dr. Jessica Harris. This idea of telling the story in quilt is her brainchild. And as you can see, there's quilting around, it echoes the image, the applique image, and the textile that is around it is something that, in this case, Laura did this particular quilt block, and she embellished it and decorated it accordingly. This is, I believe this is Minton's Playhouse. Now, Minton's initially years ago was a jazz club. And so this is her ode to that time period. Here are some other illustrations. And as you see now, that we did not, our responsibility was also mapping where each block would be placed. And one of the things that they did not want, they didn't want it in chronological order. So you're seeing something that has different time periods. Had we done it in chronological order, then you would have probably seen sort of the coloring of the quilt change as it went throughout the years. Different types of fabrics in terms of colors that were used. We used all, like I said, cotton fabrics to produce the quilt. Now, this particular history exists online. Here are some more quilts. There's Dookie Chase. All of this history exists online, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up. But let me first talk about the quilt installation. So although we did not physically install the quilt, we were also charged with making sure that there were certain types of sleeves on the quilt. So a regular quilt sleeve may sit flat against the quilt in some cases. This particular sleeve had to be extended above the quilt. And there were certain grommets that had to be in place in order for the quilt to be held up for that time period. Sorry. This particular signage includes the narrative about the exhibition and the Africa Center, the Legacy Quilt, who was involved in making it and creating the narrative. And because the quilt is so large, there is a QR code. And when you launch the QR code, you can literally move what's on the screen to any part of the quilt. And if you see a quilt block that's high up, then you can click on it and it will open up that particular block and you can read the narrative about that particular icon. That's a side view of the quilt. I will see if I can open this up in a second. So that's the link in case anyone wants to go directly to the quilt after the presentation. You can just go on to mofad.org and go to the Legacy Quilt. You scroll down and you'll see 3 different areas and you'll see the Legacy Quilt. So the data that we have had to be exported and sent to MOFAD to help them with the database that owns all, or not owns, but is a source for how you launch the information about the quilt. This is an up close of Shirley Sherrod. This is another side view of the quilt. This is Mahalia Jackson. Questlove is in the quilt because he was in the restaurant business. Elijah Muhammad, Sylvia's restaurant here in Harlem. Marcus Samuelson. Who else? People that you may not think were in the food industry, but had something to do with the food landscape. Whether they're chefs, there's Nicole Taylor. Nicole Taylor is on, I believe this is her 4th book. She just recently launched the book, which is called Watermelon and Redbirds. It's a book about celebrating through food and cooking through different celebrations, particularly Juneteenth. And she said she created the book so that you can go into your everyday grocery store and find the different items in your local stores. So it's not a book that's so over the top that you have to go to very specialty stores to buy items. So here is a picture of us on the day of the opening of the quilt. This white piece that you see here is a pillar. It's not a traditional gallery space. So there are some of their spots where they're maybe seen as hiccups a little bit, but it's because it's wheelchair accessible. There is a ramp behind us that will take you so that you can stand right in front of the quilt. So this is just for scale. You're only seeing 1, 2, and part of the 3rd panel of the quilt. You have Laura Gadsden on the left, Dr. Jessica Harris, the founder of MOFAD, Dave. I'm sorry, I forgot his last name. That is inappropriate. I will fix that. Myself and Sylvia Hernandez. This is the finished quilt that hangs in the Africa Center. So it was put together in 3 panels. After we received the printed icon, which is in the center, I then divide those up amongst Sylvia and Laura, but I have to code them in the database because I have to keep track of which artist has which particular icon. So Sylvia, we send a messenger to Sylvia, 1 to Laura. When they're finished, we get them back. They're sent to our photographer. He photographs each. He sends that to me, and then I upload it in the database. So I have the original image of it, and then I have the finish with the L/slashed image of the quilt block. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to go to another location. Let's see here. Oh, I guess I don't have it open. Let's see. Okay, so here's a video about the exhibition. Here's the Legacy Quilt. Like I said, this project is more than just the visual, just wonder of the quilt. This is about keeping track of history. It's about making sure that there's a legacy that is sharing the history of food. While we told the story of only 400 icons, there's so many more that came up as I was thinking about the project. We did not select the icons. The icons were selected by an advisory board of chefs and historians who worked with MOFAD to come up with the list of those who would be included. So this is the quilt block of Jessica. This is before it has been put together as a 3-layer piece, and it has not been quilted yet. So this is the stage once the block is completed to that point, and it's photographed for the purpose of this particular database. And as you go down, you can see which part of the quilt that you would like to see. the category. If I only want to look at beverages, then I can select beverages. I hope everyone is seeing this. You can also go geographically. What part of the country do you want to see any icons from that particular part of the United States, the time periods, and the pronouns. So if I go into distilling, here are all the people that had anything to do with distilling. And I'm not sure, I know he's in here, but I'm not sure what his icon represents. Let's see, is it this? I don't know if you know the story. There were some people that were also here. Well, they had people submit blocks. So if you see illustrations, these are folks that submitted something as an aside. But the story of Uncle Nearest Green, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story, but that was one of the things that stood out to me. And that represented that Uncle Nearest was an enslaved African that worked on a plantation. He brought his distilling technique from Africa. He worked on the plantation, and then there was a young man that came to the plantation to work as well. That particular young man learned the distilling technique from Uncle Nearest. That young man grew up to have his own company, and he started what we know now as Jack Daniels. And so Jack Daniels, for decades, used a distilling technique of Uncle Nearest Green. Now, I learned of the story while we were doing the quilt. And at the same time that we were working on the quilt, there is a website with Uncle Nearest Green's whiskey bourbon. I can't remember which one it is. And the actor Jeffrey Wright is sharing the narrative and the history of the Uncle Nearest's legacy. And so now you can actually buy Uncle Nearest's actual spirits online. So his family, I believe they're in Tennessee, and his family is now part of his legacy, carrying on his technique for distilling and bringing it to the world. This is, let's see, yes, I did get it right. Okay, Tom Bullock. Tom Bullock published one of the first cocktail books, The Ideal Bartender, the first Black authored cocktail book. And this was in 1917. However, you can still purchase the book because the book has been released. One of the things about this project and the uniqueness of it is that you're then connected with so much history that you continue to explore and explore. And the blessing for the Museum of Food and Drink is that they allowed for the concessions of a bookstore called BEM, B-E-M Books. And there's two young ladies whose sole purpose was to sell books related to food. And so because they were already in the business, they had the concessions for selling books at the Museum of Food and Drink. And happily, I was able to order Mr. Bullock's book. I haven't dug into it yet, but I will soon. So this is how all of the different types of aspects of us as an organization commissioned to do the work, keeping track of the data, keeping track of each artist and their respective work, how they were presenting the work of the icon, ordering fabrics that were representative of that time period, making sure everything was historically accurate, working with stringent timelines, and being able to deliver. And once again, as you look at the narrative here, it says the category is beverage, author, bartender, cocktail, mixologist. So all of this data is part of telling the story in quilt. I'm gonna go back a step. Let's see. This gentleman, I know he is a brewmaster and he is in Brooklyn, New York. Garrick Oliver. So this is Mr. Oliver. He's 1994, so it's a more contemporary time period. So you see the reflection of his background fabric. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this may have been something that could have illustrated what hops looks like in terms of selecting that background fabric, because he's a craft bear. He's in the craft bear industry. He's also a historian. And I'm thankful that I had the pleasure of meeting some of the icons that are still alive or their offspring, meeting them not only through the Museum of Quilt, but social media allowed for us to continue to tell the story as the museum shared the narrative of different blocks throughout the cycle of the exhibition or leading up to the exhibition. So we got to connect with so many people and share backstories. So Nicole Taylor, the author of Watermelon and Redbird, her husband is the illustrator, Adrian Franks. So we have sort of traded a little tidbits every now and then. So this is not the end of this particular project. I am sure it will travel and be packaged to go someplace within the United States. I am hopeful that there will be curriculum that is developed out of this. As we see so many times, we're often here that we don't see ourselves in different spaces. I am thankful that, yes, one, as a person who's a keeper of data, I'm a data junkie. I keep books and content and articles and links to maintain historical accuracy so that no one can say, oh, that never existed. Yes, the Africa Center is a center that's a multi-purpose space. It's not a museum, it's not a traditional gallery, but it's still part of the legacy of this particular exhibition. And that is critical in the artistic realm when we're telling our stories. Oftentimes, some people see quilters as sewers. Yes, that's part of what we do, but the narrative is just so much greater than that. From an artistic point of view, it is critical that we be defined as artists, that the concept of how this came together, I am thankful for both Laura and Sylvia for working with me and guiding me through the process. Yes, I do quilt. I am not a quilt master like Laura and Sylvia or Ife. And no, I did not stitch anything on any part of the quilt. I may have ordered fabric, but that is all I did. I was on the back end doing the communication with about 5 or 4 different entities to get the production of it done, keeping track of what I needed to bring to the Museum of Food and Drink. And there's something in the narrative of the signage that says, no job is too small or too large for Harlem Needle Arts. And so that was the museum's way of saying, each and every time they called us with something new, in some cases, I said no. And then they would call me back and say, well, if we do this, can you do it? I said, I will get back to you. Just remember, we have to turn the quilt in by a certain date. That was the most important thing to me, to make sure that we honored their timeline in making sure that it was there. It's not just our quilt that has to be installed into a space. You have to deal with different types of regulations when you're installing a piece so large. Only certain people could go on the cherry picker. So we couldn't even have our photographer come in initially to take pictures because he's not allowed on the cherry picker. So these are all things that you have to be mindful of when you're working on a commission as large as this, or even as small as this, or as small of a project. And the reason why is that you're in a space that you have to be mindful of all the other players that are part of the work and the presentation. I would like to thank Textile Talks for having me today. I am here and open for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic, Michelle. Thank you so much. We've got quite a few questions. I think we're all inspired.
Perfect.
I wanted to start just by asking first a really quick question. I'll pull these out of the Q&A. So feel free, if you'd like to add your questions to the Q&A block. We have quite a few questions about the actual process and the quilters that were involved. So you mentioned you had 2 or 3 quilters. Could you talk a little bit about that process and who made the blocks and who made the sashing, who sewed on the sashing, and who quilted the thing, and that process?
Okay, so Sylvia Hernandez, who's in Brooklyn, and Laura Gasson were the primary quilt artists that worked on the quilt. They did both. So if they're 406 blocks, I divided the blocks between the 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And so each person was given the illustration. They are also emailed ahead of time the information about that particular block. So the illustrator, let's say he did 25 blocks at a time. He sent us the illustrations. I then manipulated the blocks to make sure they were sized correctly, sent them to the printer. The printer then gets back 25 blocks to us that are on one sheet of cotton. I then cut those up, divide them out, and I say, okay, this group is going to go to Laura. This group is going to go to Sylvia, but I have to put that in the database. So when I query it, I'm querying Sylvia's list and her illustrations and Laura. The reason why they need the narrative is because they have to know what fabrics represent that time period. So we had, each of us had fabrics. So I even had fabrics just in case. There's still fabrics that exist from this. Sylvia made some postcards out of some of the fabric that's left over. We just wanted to make sure we had it. We didn't know what changes were going to happen. And so it's kind of like a quilt as you go in some cases. So they would work on that particular quilt block, the back ring, applique, the sashing. Then they would send that back to me. So now it's still not put together. I have to take that quilt block and send it to our photographer, Hugh. Hugh takes the image of the quilt block, emails me the image, and then I add it to the database. Because at any time, I can piece together the entire quilt. And part of it is that we had to map the quilt. So I literally have in the database, we have fields that say, okay, panel 1 is panel 1, row 1, column B is Marcus Samuelson, okay? And so panel is one field, row is one field, column is another field. So we have to put this all together. And it wasn't done randomly. Even though it's not in chronological order, one of what I tried to do is make sure that as much as possible, that certain key people were at eye level, like Dr. Jessica Harris. Okay, I couldn't put Dr. Jessica Harris way up at the top. And it's not to take away from anyone that was participating, but at the same time, she's a key player in this particular narrative. Also, and I guess this was, Harlem based, I looked at some of the people who were reflective of Harlem so that you could see them sort of within an eye's range of where they were located.
Keep them in the neighborhood of each other.
In the neighborhood of them, right. And also, you didn't have all the inventions together. We didn't have, all of like there's like an image of of okras and watermelons and oysters and all different types of illustrations that weren't people. We sprinkled them throughout so you could tell the story. Yes.
And so the blocks were joined after they were all completed?
All completed, right. And then once after the blocks were completed, then they go back to Sylvia and Laura and say, okay, you're working after we map it, then they put it together, because then they have to put it together in the way that it's mapped. So they have an entire list queried of what they are working on. And like I said early on, they both have long arm machines. And for those of you, if you're not a quilter, a long arm machine is a long machine that you can affix the quilt to and roll it on. And it has a mechanism where you can machine quilt onto the quilt so the 3 layers are connected. We used a light cotton loft batting. The back of the quilt, although it's not shown in this particular exhibition, of course, there's more to the exhibition than just the legacy quilt, but the back is just as fabulous as the front. And I can't wait until it travels to the next space so that the back can also be shown. It says 1619 to infinity.
That's great.
And that's different fabrics.
Wonderful.
Okay.
There's quite a few questions about sort of the
Yes.
future of the project. One being, do you think there might be a book ever at some point? And the other being, do you know, I know you haven't said where it's going to travel to. I don't know if that's still being decided or if it's top secret right now, but.
I think it's still being decided. I am happy to share once I know. If I knew, I would share.
Yeah.
I see that in terms of the book, there was a book. The book actually was done in 2020, and they used it as a fundraiser. They did not republish the book, but they are organizing to hopefully get a publisher to do a new book. As I know, this is historical, right? And for me, books still have much value in our community, in our libraries, our personal libraries. That's how we tell the story of our history. So I am hopeful that we will know all those details, and I'm happy to share as soon as we're going to be connected to this quilt for life, even though we are commissioned and we don't own the quilt. So that we'll definitely share that information.
Fantastic. So
how much does it weigh?
How much does it weigh? That was the next question. That's a good question when we talk about traveling the quilt.
I would say it is probably close to probably 70 pounds altogether, maybe. Yeah. And I say that because of working with what is his title? I think he's he's like a fabricator, I believe, who installs this type of work. And so we had to have conversations with him about, because not everyone has installed a quilt. So you have to go to the right person to do the type of work. So he and I had a number of conversations about the mechanisms that he was going to use to make sure that the quilt stayed taut in terms of how it was hanging, that it would not sag at any point, things like that. Okay, we did talk about each block of staffers. I was wondering if any of the icons would or could be turned into t-shirts, aprons, or bags. Okay, so that would be wonderful if the icons were reproduced in some way. The Museum of Food and Drink owns the images, so that would be their call.
We had quite a few questions about what it means to adopt a block. It looks like that is making a donation to the Museum of Food and Drink. Right. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process if you know?
Well, I know that you can go on to their website, that link, which is I shared, and you can, I think there's another link where you can click on it and you can go through the available blocks and you can adopt it. And another window opens and tells you the starting amount for adopting a block.
So certainly check that out. It looks like maybe you get a print of the block and there's different
You get a print, either a print of the block. I know your name is then associated with the block in their giving pool. So something of that nature.
Check it out. And my last question is, not all of us will take on a project quite of this magnitude, but I'm wondering if you have tips when you're doing a big project that feels overwhelming, or you're working with a couple people. What's your best piece of advice that you feel like you've learned through this whole process? that you maybe might not have known at the beginning?
Um, hmm, I would say, I think I need to be better at Adobe Illustrator.
It's a good tip.
That's one thing. Yes, we have a fabulous graphic designer. Adrian is fabulous. There are other aspects of it sometimes you have to change things. And so being proficient in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, that is something which I am making time to do, because the process of printing and working with the printer needs it a certain way. And so if it's the 11th hour and I can't call Adrian in the middle of the night and say, we need to change something, then, I pulled my daughter aside and say, okay, what do you know? So yes, let me give a shout out to Aaliyah, because she was up with me some nights. I think learning more about the Adobe world in terms of being able to manipulate images at the last minute. Thankfully, everything turned out just smoothly. It's stressful because you're on a timeline. It is stressful because as you're going toward Thanksgiving and then Christmas, the printer is like, oh, well, our team is out for the rest of the week. But we have to rely on her to get us the information, get us the illustrations on fabric, and then give enough time to each artist to do what they need to do. And I see Scott Barton, Dr. Scott Barton, who's a historian and was a consultant on the projects. And he shared in terms of pulling together the list that they spent nearly 5 months researching, sorting in and out individuals, geographies, foodstuffs, inventions, inventors, farming, and et cetera. And I'm happy to say that through this process, both on his own projects as well as MOFAD, that I now have another person in my life that is a genius as it relates to this narrative.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Yeah, everyone who joined us from the project and everyone who joined us today. And we really appreciate it. And please do, I hope that you'll all visit Harlem Needle Arts online. They're at www.harlemneedlearts.org. And again, the quilt was at the Museum of Food and Drink, and hopefully will come somewhere near you. That's our real hope, that we'll all get to see it in person at some point. But for now, the website is really a fantastic way to explore the quilt. I was just playing around before we started and looking at all the blocks from North Carolina, which is where I am. And I was like, oh, I know this person and this person. This is so exciting to see and so cool to be able to search it that way and break it down in so many different ways. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I really appreciate it, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate everyone that took time to come on and listen and share. And someone I see wants to know if we're accepting submissions. Does it mean you are adding to this quilt or preparing to do another? We are not personally doing anything else at this point for MOFAD unless something else comes along later on. Do we take other commissions? We do. And it just depends on what it is and who's available and what your time is.
Fantastic. Great. I want to thank our Textile Talk sponsors again. This series would not be possible without them. And the Quilt Alliance will be back again next week with a program of our own, an interview with Holly Ann Knight of String and Story. She's a long armor and a long arm teacher and just opened a brick and mortar location of String and Story. And we'll be interviewing her for our S.O.S podcast. So tune in, it'll be at 2 o'clock next Wednesday, and I hope we'll see you there. Thanks again, Michelle, and thanks again for coming.
Thanks,
everyone. Bye-bye.